Hi, this is the norming video for 4th grade writing, constructed response, Common Assessment 1. My name is Monica Warren and I will be walking you through the constructed response question and some of the answers that you may expect to see, as well as spending a lot of time on the rubric to show you how to really read through the rubric with some guided questions. So when you first open a scholar's response, you'll see the prompt is right here. So they are answering the prompt right about a time when you had to work hard to achieve a goal or to earn something. And so this would be a narrative prompt, so they should be following the structures of a narrative composition, as well as writing about how hard they worked, what the goal was, or what it is that they earned. If we continue to scroll through here, you'll find down at the bottom some samples of scholar work. This is in the exemplar. What I would recommend that you do first, before you even start grading a constructed response question, is that you do what this teacher did here, and you write O for organization, I for ideas, and C for conventions at the top of the scholar's paper. You will not give an overall 1, 2, 3, or 4 for the quality of the paper. You will grade each of these individually based on the rubric, and then you will input those into a where. So it's important that you note the difference between the three. It's also very helpful for scholars because sometimes scholars will be very good at one of the three of these and know where they need to work more, but they will only know that if you put the three on their paper. And so you'll see it looks like this for each of these. So it would start off with you just having this part that's boxed in OIC. What I would then recommend that you do is that you spend about 1 to 2 minutes reading through the composition. Read through it pretty quickly at first, just really getting an idea for what is this composition about, getting the gist of it, what is it they were trying to achieve, and how did they work hard. Once you've read through it the first time to get a gist of it, the second time is when you can read through it and annotate it, meaning writing on it, like if you see a misspelling or you see something you want to remember, and reading through it more carefully. You'll also read through it a few more times as we go through the rubric, but that will come later depending on each scholar's paper. Some scholars' paper will be very hard, for example, to remember, okay, exactly what are the details are about, but some will be a little bit easier. So again, you may have to come back and forth to this. I would also recommend that the first few samples that you read, you do this with your grade level team at your school, so that you can all be normed and talk about some things that you may either be confused about or that you really want to make sure that everybody is clear on. So once you read through it a couple times, the next thing you'll want to do is go to the rubric. This is the rubric that TEA gives us for the STAR test, but it is put into a little bit of a different format. And I've also added some guided questions right over here that can help with each line of the rubric. The first overall page is about organization. That's the O that you wrote at the top of the paper. You'll see that the first line is all about, is this even written as a narrative, as a story? For the most part, a 1 and 2 will be no or not really. It's not really written as a narrative. They don't really tell a story in their composition. And then a 3 or a 4 is a yes. So what you'll do is, okay, is it written as a narrative? And you'll see that there's some things bolded. Sometimes they're underlined. That really will help you figure out what should stand out for this row. One thing to note is that while level 3 is for the most part appropriate and somewhat responsive, you'll find that a level 4 is harder to get. A level 4 is very, very, very purposeful. So as we move through these, just keep that in mind that a level 4 should be the highest they can get, the top. They really do this, and there's no way that they could really improve for that row. So as you move through here, you will grade each of these rows. So is it written as a narrative? And reading the rubric, you will say you will determine between a 2 or 3 or 3 or 4. The next row, is it organized into paragraphs from the beginning, the middle, and the end? So it does not have to be very formulaic where they write exactly 3 paragraphs, but you want there to be some logic to how they organize their paragraphs. If it's very random or it seems like it's one giant paragraph or it's just not very suited to what they wrote about, they would get a 1. If it's conveying some sense of the experience and somewhat suited, they would get a level 2. This is where these bolded words really come into play. The difference between a 3 and a 4, a level 3 is that the paragraphs are very clear. The way that the strategies of organization are used are very clear, but in a level 4, it's very skillful. So again, that means that it goes above and beyond just the basic expectation of making your writing clear, and it really shows that writer is very skillful at showing their organization strategies. For the next row of the rubric, you'll be looking at details and whether or not they're focused on the topic. So are all the details on topic? And again, as you read through these, you'll see, okay, many of the details aren't contributing to the narrative. Maybe they were starting off writing about a soccer game and they ended up writing about a time they were at the store with their mom. So the details just really lack a focus. A level 2 is typically where scholars are, maybe they have a little bit of focus, but every now and then it'll just sort of lapse. It's not sustained throughout, or maybe it's not very coherent all the way through. So maybe there's just like a random sentence thrown in here or there that kind of disrupts the flow. And again, the difference as we move forward between a 3 and a 4 is that you'll find that a level 4 really, the way that they use their details really strengthen the focus. Whereas a level 3 is an adequate focus. Like, yes, I can understand this and there are minor lapses in focus, but a level 4 would be, wow, the way that they have used their details really keeps me interested the whole time I read this. And then the last line of organization has to do with the flow from sentence to sentence. One thing that really sticks out to me for a level 1 is if you find a lot of repetition in the things that they're saying. For example, they're saying the same sentences or the same idea over and over again, or they're using just the same wordiness over and over again. That would be a level 1. A level 2 really is about inconsistencies sentence to sentence. Like maybe it's fine at one point, but then there's some wordiness later on. Or that the sentence connections, like transitions, are just really weak. So they may start a sentence with but, and then go ahead with the sentence. So it's logical, but it's just very weak. So as we move through a 3 and a 4, a 3 would be that it's the sentences presentation, the sentence and the presentation are controlled and meaningful. But what we'll find with a level 4 is that those sentence-to-sentence connections, those transitions, are very, very meaningful, and they actually, it's not just that it's logical, but it's that those sentence-to-sentence connections really enhance the movement of the narrative. So once you have graded and thought of where a particular paper falls on each of these lines, you will give an overall average. Organization, because there's 4 lines to the rubric, is the most difficult one. For example, if you have a 4, a 3, a 3, and then a 2, that means it's a 4, 3, 3, 2. So it would average to about a 3. And so you would award a 3 for that example. If you have a 4, 4 and a 3, 3, you would always err on the lower side because that is how TEA will grade STAR tests. So you would award a 3 even though the average would be about a 3.5. You would still go with the lower amount. If you have a 4, 3, 2, 2, for example, most of the organization strands are in the level 2, so you should err on the side of what is the lowest 2 or the lowest 2 are in the level 2, so knock it down to a 2. Even though 1 is at a 4, it's really still averaging down here between a 2 and a 3. So once you've graded on organization, if you see down here, next to where the O is, you can write in the score for that, and then go back to the rubric for ideas and conventions. And like I was saying, those are a little bit easier because as you can see, there's only 2 lines of the rubric. So for the first line of the rubric, the guiding question has to do with details. And that's really the whole point of ideas. Is it meaningful? Do the details contribute? Is it interesting? Is it fun to read? Was I engaged as the teacher just reading this paper? And so the first line will have to do with, again, with the details, but really how those details develop the story. Not necessarily are they on target, but do they develop? Do they add a lot? Do they go really deep? I think a really good question to think about for development of ideas, can you tell that this experience was extremely important to the writer? And one word that sticks out to me here is surface level. So if we're talking about the details being inappropriate or vague, or maybe it's a very serious paper and they write a detail that's kind of funny, but it doesn't really fit, it doesn't really show that scholar's voice, that would be a 1. If it's very surface level, so they're writing about a time they worked really hard to achieve something, but it's very surface level and you don't ever get any details as to why it's so important to the writer, then that would be a level 2 because it's surface level. If they add some substance and you get an overall feeling, that would be a level 3. And again, in order to get a level 4, the details have to contribute significantly. All the details are both specific and very well chosen, and they really add to the overall experience of the reader. For this next line, this one is just, is it interesting? Is it fun to read? Is it engaging? And so this one really comes down to, is it very interesting to read? If it's, the answer is a no, it's probably a 1 or 2. If it's, for the most part, it's a 3. And if you are just like blown away by how interesting and thought-provoking the scholar's paper was, it's a 4. And you can see there's a lot of really good words that are bolded in here, such as engaging. One thing to note is that if they're writing about a situation that is not realistic at all for a 4th grader, such as swimming with sharks and defeating the sharks and beating the sharks, for example, that's not a realistic situation, and so that would be a 1. And that's just an important thing to note also, because even though it may be very engaging and interesting, it does not establish a realistic situation. So once you've graded this, you will average the 2. For example, a 3 and a 2, again, would average down to a 2. If it's a 3 and a 3, you would give a 3. If it's a 1 and a 3, you could average it to a 2. Once you've done that, you will come down and you'll write in what they got for ideas. The last part that you'll want to do is use of language and conventions. So this has to do with 3 main parts, which are the word choice, which is the first row, the sentence structure, which is the second row, and then the overall use of grammar, punctuation, spelling, etc. All of that would come in this last row. So sometimes the things like spelling, capitalization, punctuation really stick out the most because they're the things that are like most, for example, if something's misspelled, it's the most obviously wrong. But just because a scholar struggles with grade level spelling doesn't necessarily mean that all of the language and conventions is a 1, because only the last row has to do with the grammar piece. So we come back up here. When we talk about word choice, again, using the descriptors in here will really allow you to see, okay, does the word choice make it hard for me to read? If the answer is yes, then that would be a 1. If it's very limiting, it would be a 2. If it's effective and like pretty specific and concrete, it would be a 3. And then to get a level 4, the writing really needs to come alive. Was it very expressive and very vivid? Did they use metaphors and similes that really painted a picture in your mind as the reader of what the experience was for that writer? The next one will have to do with sentence structure. So as you go through here, this really has to do with like how controlled and how varied are the sentences. As a fourth grader, we don't want them writing in very basic, I can run, I run fast sentences. So those would be very simplistic or awkward. As you move through here, really if it's a 1, they're very weak and they affect how effective the narrative is. If it's a 2, it's limiting. If it's a 3, again, it's like for the most part, it's pretty fine. But then to get a 4, all of those sentences need to be very, very purposeful and very varied and well controlled. Now for the last line of the rubric, does the writer use correct spelling, capitalization, punctuation, usage, and conventions? So for this one, you're looking at several things all at once, but you're looking at sentence boundaries, spelling, punctuation, grammar. So if the writer has little command over the words they're using, over the sentences, if there's some serious and persistent errors, it would be a level 1. And this could be a paper that for the most part is maybe a level 2 or a level 3 or maybe even a level 4. But what's really holding that scholar back is that they're not using periods, for example. It can still be awarded a level 3 or a 4 in organization and ideas, but then be rated lower for conventions. To get a level 2 for this row, it would be kind of like a partial command. Maybe it's not always distracting, but at times you feel distracted as a reader because you don't know what's coming next because there's maybe spelling errors or punctuation errors. A level 3 would be adequate, so there'd be very few disruptions, and everything would be like maybe there's some errors, but they're grade level appropriate. And then to get a level 4, the writer is really demonstrating consistently that they know spelling, capitalization, punctuation, grammar, etc., all of those things, and that they're all grade level appropriate. If a scholar is misspelling a word such as flabbergasted, that is fine, and they can still be at a level 4 because you see right here it says age-appropriate spelling. So if it's a really advanced word that they're using to bump up their word choice, it won't necessarily count against them here as long as it does not detract at all from the clarity of the writing. So same thing, you would average your 3 scores to get an overall score for the conventions. And then once you do that, you will have 3 scores, as you can see here, at the top of a paper, and then you would input it into Aware using the suggestions down at the bottom. You wouldn't give a 0, but you would give between a 0 and 4 for each of the 3 areas. If you have any questions about this or you have a scholar response that you're not quite sure how to grade, underneath the norming video there is a discussion board that you can open and ask your question. Even if your question is that you would really like another set of eyes on a paper, please go ahead and post that, and either the CTL or myself will be checking that regularly, and we can provide assistance or answer any questions that you have. Thank you.